Midland Gliding Club. Launch Point Training Video. This video is an introduction to the Flying Retrieve launching system at Midland Gliding Club, and is aimed at helping you to operate the system safely. It may seem a bit complicated at first. Don't worry, it will soon become second nature, and you will rapidly become part of an efficient team running the launch point operation. Overview. At the start of the day, the main winch and retrieve winch are set up in a position that depends on the wind direction and strength on the day. Gliders are launched by a cable from the main winch. As the glider is pulled up, a smaller cable from the retrieve winch is towed up behind it. When the glider reaches the top of the launch, the retrieve winch pulls the cable back again, ready for the next glider. Let's look at the setup in more detail. The main winch cable is attached to a small parachute, and from the parachute a rope trace goes to the glider. At the end of the trace is a shorter strop with a weak link and a colored band. The weak link is like the fuse in an electrical circuit. It is designed to break before any damage can occur to the glider. There are several different strengths of weak links, and each glider must have the correct link. There is a small colored disc on the side of the glider, and the color of the weak link must correspond with the color of the disc on the glider. It may be necessary to change the strop for one of the correct color before attaching it to the glider. Launch signaling is by signal lamps with an audio backup. A slow flash and beep means take up slack, a fast flash and beep signals all out, a continuous light and tone is stop. The audio signal is repeated in all the vehicles. If you are driving one of the airfield vehicles and hear a slow beep, it means a launch is about to take place. Most gliders have two hooks, an aero tow hook on the front and a winch hook just in front of the main wheel. The cable must be attached to the glider winch hook. There are 4 people involved in the launch. One person writes down the launch details in the log. One person lifts the wing and prepares to run with it. The person who has attached the cable walks behind the glider, checks that there is nothing above or behind the glider and says, "All clear above and behind, take up slack," and swings his arm downwards in an arc. The retrieve winch driver radios the main winch to inform them of the type of glider to be launched, and checks that there is nothing above or behind the glider that would be a reason not to launch, for instance a landing glider that might conflict with the launch. When the wing holder signals take up slack, they give the take up slack signal to the main winch by pressing a yellow button that flashes a slow light flash and sends an audio signal over the radio to the winch. The cable will start to move as the winch takes up slack. Once the glider starts to move, the retrieve winch driver presses the green button, which signals all out to the main winch with a fast light flash and audio tone. At the top of the launch the main winch reduces power, the cable automatically back releases, the main winch driver radios release, the retrieve winch driver then engages the clutch on the retrieve winch to pull the cable back to the launch point ready for the next launch. Let's look at these roles in turn in more detail. These are the log keeper, the retrieve winch driver, the cable attacher and signaler, and the wing holder. The log keeper. The log keeper must record the time of every flight, along with the aircraft registration and names of the pilot or pilots. The person keeping the log should, as far as possible, not be engaged in any other task other than log keeping, for instance driving the retrieve winch. If you are keeping the log and need to stop for any reason, you must hand it to another person to continue. The retrieve winch driver. The retrieve winch driver is responsible for the safety of the launch, and should not undertake this task unless they have been supervised for a number of launches by an experienced retrieve winch driver, until they are competent. When a glider is getting ready to launch, first check the engine is running, and the drum speed is set to whatever has been specified for the day. Once the retrieve winch driver sees the cable being attached to the glider, they radio the main winch, for instance, "Main winch, next glider is AK-13. The main winch will confirm the glider type. This timing of the radio call saves delay and discomfort. On the left of the retrieve winch is an emergency guillotine lever. Pulling this will cut the retrieve cable. You have to pull it quite hard and quite a long way. The retrieve winch driver's left hand must be on this lever for the first part of the launch. The person who has attached the cable will walk to behind the wing, check all is clear above and behind, and if it is, they will signal to take up slack. The retrieve winch driver must be sure that there is no one in front of the glider before commencing the launch. The retrieve winch driver must do their own check that all is clear above and behind, before pressing the yellow button to signal take up slack. Once the glider starts to move, the retrieve winch driver presses the green button to signal all out, and holds it until the glider accelerates. As the glider accelerates, it is important to watch the retrieve cable. If it looks like it will come into contact with the glider, or poses a risk to anyone or anything, operate the guillotine immediately. Once the glider has accelerated, the retrieve winch driver releases the all-out button. The signal beep uses the radio channel. The winch driver cannot communicate with the retrieve winch driver when the signal buttons are pressed. The stop button releases the radio signal after a few seconds. Once the glider is in the full climb, the retrieve winch driver moves their left hand to the retrieve winch clutch lever, and holds the speed control with right hand. At the top of the launch, the cable releases from the glider, and the main winch radios release. The retrieve winch driver immediately engages the clutch fully. The clutch should be fully engaged or fully disengaged. See red and green markings next to it, never in between. If you do not hear release or you're not sure, do not retrieve, just let the cable drop. Doing nothing causes much less than a minute's delay. Retrieving unexpectedly usually breaks the cable, and can waste more than 10 minutes. Do nothing further until the main winch driver gives instructions. During the retrieve winch driver must monitor the main winch for a stop signal, which is a continuous light. If this happens, the retrieve winch driver releases the clutch lever immediately and hits the red button. If the retrieve winch driver sees anyone approaching the cable, a glider about to land across the cable, anything that might pose a risk to anyone, they release the clutch lever and hit the red stop button immediately. The main winch drum is heavy, and wants to keep spitting out cable at the same speed. To avoid tangles, it is important that the retrieve speed is reduced progressively, starting about halfway through a full retrieve. Never use the notches when reducing throttle, keep it smooth. As the parachute approaches, the retrieve winch driver reduces the speed progressively to stop the chute about 15 feet from the retrieve winch. Once the cable has stopped, they disengage the clutch and return the speed lever to the specified position. Stop the engine before anyone approaches the cable unless there is a good reason to keep it running. If in any doubt about the safety of the launch or retrieve, do not hesitate to hit the red button and operate the guillotine. Once the cable has stopped, even briefly, don't move it again without the main winch driver's permission. In the event of a cable break, the main winch driver is in charge. Stop the engine, remove the key. Make sure no one approaches the cable, or opens the drum cover without the permission of the main winch driver. Stay by the radio and follow the main winch driver's instructions exactly. Watch for unintended cable movement possibilities, for instance vehicles crossing the cable, or a glider landing across it. Warn the main winch driver if this happens. Do not do anything else without checking with the main winch driver first. Don't put your hands near the cable or drum if there are vehicles moving on the airfield between the winches. Cable attacher and signaler. After the retrieve is completed, the rope trace must be fetched from where it is attached to the parachute. The parachute is cleared of debris, and the swivels checked for tangles. The person doing this must remain behind the line of the barrier until the cable has stopped moving. If the cable breaks, it can whip back violently. Ideally, wait for the retrieve winch driver to switch off the engine. It is sometimes necessary to keep the engine running. If so, take extra care. Even with the engine off, the cable could move. Always stand so that if the cable tightens, it will be pulled away from you. Never stand inside a cable loop, and never wrap cable or rope around your hands. Once the rope trace has been pulled to the glider, check which weak link the glider requires, and change the strop if necessary. Always inspect the weak link. The hole in the middle must be round, not oval. The person attaching the cable must wait for the pilot to have completed their checks without distracting or interrupting them. When the pilot says, "Brakes closed and locked, cable on please," attach the cable. Check that the trace is the same color as the disc on the glider. If in doubt, check with the pilot. It is good practice to make a visual check that the brakes and canopy are indeed closed and locked, and that the tail dolly has been removed. Once the cable is attached, walk behind the wing, check there are no aircraft above or behind the glider, and no people, animals or obstacles in front. Say loudly, "All clear above and behind, take up slack." Signal take up slack by swinging your arm downwards in 180-degree arc. Keep watching behind the glider for anything that may constitute a risk, and be prepared to shout stop, and raise both arms, if you see anything on the ground or in the air which might interfere with the launch. If the launch is delayed, make sure you check behind again before giving up slack. You do not need to signal all out, that is up to the retrieve winch driver. Wingrunner. The wingrunner's job is only to hold the wing and run with it as the glider accelerates. The main risk in the first few seconds of the launch is that the wing drops and catches on the ground, causing a ground loop. In most cases when this has happened, the wing has dropped immediately it is let go, so if the person holding the wing feels a significant down force on the wing, they should stop the launch by shouting, "Stop," and raising one arm. Leave the wing on the ground until the cable goes on, and put it back on the ground if you decide to delay the launch. This helps pilots in or near the circuit, especially if they need to turn in early. Hold the wingtip lightly. You are simply supporting its weight. Do not drag the wingtip backwards. Summary. This may sound complicated, but you will very quickly learn to operate the launch point as an efficient team, to achieve a fast and safe launch rate. The key points to remember are: you must not approach the cable while it is moving. In the event of a cable break, don't do anything until instructed by the winch driver. Both the wing holder and retrieve winch driver must confirm that it is all clear above and behind before commencing the launch. During the launch and the retrieve winch driver must monitor the main winch for a stop signal. The retrieve winch driver's left hand must be on the guillotine for the first part of the launch. The retrieve winch driver must be sure the person attaching the cable has moved behind the glider before signaling take up slack. Anyone can shout stop at any time, it is never wrong to do this. This is the end of the presentation.